Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Good morning to all of you, and all the committee members of the association, respected Sri Patwardhan sir, and my fellow colleagues and dear participants. I'm sorry for being 10 minutes late, but it was a tough night. The whole night I was working on the today's presentation. So this presentation, two things. The yesterday's PowerPoint presentation has already been sent by me yesterday night after fine-tuning it, and the committee will take care of circulating the same to all of you. And today's presentation, I could probably had to prepare it only in one night, so I'll be again fine-tuning it. Certain things I would like to add into those presentations, mainly the relevant statutory provisions and couple of more things. And maybe in this week itself, I will just forward it to the committee, and they will arrange to send it to all of you. So we have a whole week to go for this complete mega conference getting over. So we have time to do that. But before I start with the today's topic, I was requested to spare my thoughts on pre-consultation SOCOS notice. I will just take it up from where we left yesterday. One more other thing, please come to the slides. I think it could be somewhere around 40, slide number 40. There is a title, pre-notice consultation. There is a title sheet also. Maybe after that, conclusion, before the conclusion ke pehle. No, you will, no, niche jaiye, niche. Acha, scroll down, yeah. Still, और भी नीचे स्क्रॉल नहीं, ये भी नहीं, तो इसके बाद ही होगा, सॉरी. Yeah, okay. So I'll just deal with him for a few minutes. Another request which came from Swapnil ji is about the assessment and audit. That he wanted me to say something about that in detail. Now, I have given some careful thought to this request. I would have loved to do that, but I feel assessment and audit, considering its peculiar nature under GST laws, and for that matter under even erstwhile excise and service tax laws, it may require a very detailed deliberation. So I will just coordinate with the committee and see how best we can deal with this subject instead of doing it in a superficial manner. So just wait for some time. Assessment and audit is something which needs to be looked at, because this is from where the grassroots level problem arises and some ground realities are required to be taken care of. Apart from the legal statutory provisions, which one should be very clear about in the context of the GST laws. So I will just see that if I can do this subsequently. Am I really audible properly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Coming to concept, and the third last thing is about the question answers. Yesterday, I was really surprised to see that there has been a barrage of questions from the participants, which shows that in such an exhaustive day, the participants had not really lost their vigor, their enthusiasm to really deliberate or listen to the deliberate and reflect upon these subjects, which the faculties are actually trying to interact with them with. So there have been about 110 questions already yesterday, barring a couple of repetitions. Almost 30 questions were in the context of the subject dealt with by Sri Manoj ji, and almost 75 questions are directed to me. I was really not prepared for this type of assault on me. So what I have suggested is, I would like to deal with all the questions. I mean, I don't like to leave the questions unanswered. We may have to work out some way of dealing with all these questions, including maybe whatever questions may arise at the end of this session or during the session. I'm sure I'll just coordinate with committee, and committee will take the best call on that, and how during or after this conference also, how all these questions can be dealt with in the best possible manner with the least inconvenience. We'll just see that. With these opening remarks, friends, let me first deal with this topic, which was part of my yesterday's presentation, concept of pre-notice consultation. Fundamentally, this concept has its roots in the TARC recommendation of, and TARC is a Tax Administration Reform Commission, which was headed by none other than Dr. Parthasarathi Shom. In 2014, Dr. Shom presented his first report under the aegis of TARC, and one of the very important, the recommendations made by the commission was relating to avoiding the litigation, futile litigation, meaningless litigation. In the context of that, the commission had recommended that some sort of a mechanism, I'm not putting the exact words, the tone and tenor of the recommendation, some sort of a mechanism should be established whereby before the litigation really starts in the form of SOCOS notice, some interaction, some healthy, sincere, honest interaction takes place between the revenue, between the department and the taxpayer, and both sides can look into the very validity or the justifiability of the demand which the department proposes to raise against the taxpayer. And this will give an opportunity to the taxpayer whether to really look into the objection of the department, the stand of the department, and if it finds validity into the stand, it finds that there is a merit in the stand, the taxpayer can take an informed and call whether to kill the litigation there and then, to nip it in the bud at that stage only by accepting the demand, proposed liability, and settle it there and then, thereby avoiding the whole sort of SOCOS notice. This was actually treated as a pre-notice consultation. The board accepted this recommendation wholeheartedly and vide its first circular dated December 2015. The pre-notice consultation was recommended by the board. The slide has disappeared, please. The pre-notice consultation was instructed by this first instruction, set of instructions. CBEC instructed all the revenue officers to undertake the pre-notice consultation. This pre-notice consultation has two riders. One, the amount of duty or service tax involved, or for that matter, customs duty also, should be more than 50 lakhs. If it is below 50 lakhs, the pre-notice consultation was not recommended. And the second one, that it should not involve the offense like a evasion of tax, or in those cases, they were kept outside the purview of the pre-notice consultation. It should not be the contravention of the act or often some sort of a evasion cases. These two exclusions were built into the board instruction. What is, however, noteworthy is the fact that though the pre-notice consultation relating instruction, they were never part of the enactment or rules also. They were never part of the statutory provisions. The board said that any such non-adherence to pre-notice consultation process will render the SOCOS notice invalid. And this is very interesting. Though the law did not provide for the pre-notice consultation legally, the board instruction said that it will render it invalid. These instructions were reiterated by the board by its master circular dated March 2017, para 5.0. In para 5, again, board reiterated the same instruction. And come GST regime, and one found that initially this pre-notice consultation, there was some sort of a, it went into hibernation, it went into oblivion, because neither the law nor the board fresh instruction in the context of GST provided for the pre-notice consultation. And it would be difficult to say that the pre-notice consultation instruction of the board of the prior to GST which were issued would continue to be applicable under GST. This position remained for nearly 2 years. However, on 9th October 2019, board issued notification number 49 by 2019, by which various provisions of the CGST rules were amended. And one of the amendments pertained to Rule 142. Under Rule 122, as we must be aware of, it provides for the issue of the summary of the SOCOS notice in DRC 01 And then there is DRC-0D, DRC-03, etc. I don't normally like to get into the form business. Substance is important. So by this notification, the sub-rule 1A was introduced in Rule 142. And thereby it was provided that before issue of any show cause notice under Section 73 or Section 74, please mark the words. Before issue of any show cause notice under Section 73 or Section 74, the proper officer shall issue a statement to the person concerned about to the registered person, indicating the details of the tax, interest, or penalty, that is proposed liability towards the tax, interest, or penalty. And this statement was required to be issued in form DRC-01A. DRC-01A has two parts, Part A and Part B. In Part A, the proper officer will indicate the details regarding the proposed liability for whatsoever reason. And in Part B, it was further provided by sub-rule 2 that if the registered person accepts the liability, then he will pay it, and after making the payment, he will inform through the Part B. In case he does not accept the liability either in full or partly, then he can make his representation in Part B of DRC-01A. And that was the end. These are the only two provisions which were inserted by notification number 49/2019. And it was further amended. And what is important is that initially sub-rule 1A spoke about the proper officer shall communicate the details of the proposed liability to the registered person in the state. That is in form DRC-01A. Shall communicate. By notification number 74/2019, issued on 15th October 2019, again amending such CGST rules. One of the amendments carried out was the sub-rule 1A, whereby the word shall communicate were replaced by may communicate. And today, the position is this, that in case of sub-rule 1A, it is basically a proper officer may communicate. So instead of shall, it has now become may. Earlier, it was considered to be mandatory. Even the board circular in the erstwhile excise and service tax regime had made it effectively mandatory. Now it has become discretionary. A proper officer may issue, proper officer may not issue. I'll come to that. Another important aspect is that unlike the erstwhile instructions of the board, there is no exclusion carved out under the GST regime for the issue of DRC-01A. I will consider this as a pre-notice consultation process only, though it is not regarded, it is not described as such. Let me be very clear. The word pre-notice consultation you will not find anywhere in the statute, neither in the CGST Act nor in the CGST rules also. It is not even there in the board instruction post GST also. But the process is akin to, similar to pre-notice consultation. And here, no exception, no exclusion have been carved out. Effectively, it means that any show cause notice for any amount on any ground, whether invoking the normal period of limitation under Section 73 or alleging the evasion of tax under Section 74, irrespective of the basis of the show cause notice, irrespective of the amount involved in the show cause notice, irrespective of whether it is a tax, whether it is a ITC, whether it is interest, whether it is penalty, this DRC-01A was made compulsory till 14th October 2019. And now it has been made discretionary, though its all-pervading scope remains. It's still. And this will lead to, this has actually created a very piquant situation, as we shall see shortly. So far so good. All this is very fine. Such type of interaction, if it takes place in where both sides have a trust in each other, both sides have a respect for each other, one side respects another as a revenue officer, another side respects the taxpayer as one who is participating in the building of the nation. I mean, that is the claim goes, isn't it? We are participating in the building of the nation by paying the tax. And if in the right earnest, if this is followed, this is a good initiative, no doubt. Does it really happen that way? This is the telling question we have to seek the answer for. And that is why my bullet, is the process really beneficial or a trap for the taxpayers? Please understand, friends, indirect taxation litigation, particularly in indirect tax, is an extremely complex process compared to others. And I'm not making a self-serving statement. The another thing is that it is a lengthy, time-consuming, costly process. If given the circumstances, if the taxpayer can kill the litigation at the first available opportunity and avoid this lengthy litigation, it is always better for him. And whether the professionals may like or not like, it is our abounding duty to really guide our clients properly so that the litigation can be avoided. Now, and there this pre-notice consultation can play or expected to play a very vital role. I am fondly reminded of one of my very favorite ghazals of Hafiz Jalandhari. मोहब्बत करने वाले कम ना होंगे तेरी महफिल में लेकिन हम ना होंगे. And मेहंदी हसन साहब ने ये गाया हुआ है maybe 1950s या उसके पहले. And the last year of this ghazal actually, which is applicable not only the taxation litigation between department and the taxpayers for all the religions. And Patwardhan sir just now spoke about the the religion also. So all the religions for the society, between the relationship between the two individuals also. And that the couplet is, दिलों की उलझनें बढ़ती रहेगी अगर कुछ मशवरे आलम न होंगे. If two peoples, if there is no heart-to-heart talk between two persons, then the conflict between two people will continue to, मशवरे आलम, दिलों की उलझनें बढ़ती रहेगी अगर कुछ मशवरे आलम न होंगे. मशवरे आलम, heart-to-heart talk, हृदय से हृदय की बातें अगर नहीं होती है तो प्रॉब्लम होती है. Now, so with this, now let us see how this really process works. Next, please. The first and foremost question is, go in the previous slide. Yeah. The experience unfortunately shows that the spirit and purpose behind pre-notice consultation is marred in an extremely casual manner. A typical pre-notice consultation starts with a sort of a SOCOS notice that it is proposed to, raise the following issue SOCOS notice against you for proposing the recovery of the following amount with interest and penalty. All the provisions are cited. Basis is also cited, and then you are being called upon. SSC is being called upon to participate in the pre-notice consultation. Then what happens? The poor SSC and his advisor, in good faith, under bona fide belief that the notice which is proposed to be issued to me has no legs to stand on, and this is something futile litigation in which I am being dragged into. Let me go. So he will prepare. It could be an absolutely absurd demand, or it could be a valid demand also, complex issue also. In all these cases, just to kill the litigation, the poor SSC with his advisor prepares himself, puts all the grounds and participates into pre-notice consultation. Unfortunately, rarely after pre-notice consultation, the SOCOS notice idea is dropped. It is rarely dropped, and particularly if the basis of that proposed liability is the audit objections. So it is always converted into the SOCOS notice. Rarest of the rare case, the department would not proceed, proper officer will not proceed with the SOCOS notice. And in that case, what will happen is that he will listen to you patiently and then kindly, and then comes another SOCOS notice under section 73 or section 74. Forget about 74 right now. A normal SOCOS notice will come. How that SOCOS notice will read? That SOCOS notice will, apart from all other relevant facts, will net down that accordingly in adherence to rule 142A, 142(1)A, or maybe in adherence to the board instruction, a pre-notice consultation was actually undertaken, and the party was asked to, participate. I mean, party, these are the replies of the party. I find that the submissions made by the party are not acceptable for this and this reason. If you are lucky, you will get the reasons for non-acceptance of your submissions. If you are not lucky, and then maybe you will not get even the reasons also. I do not like the reasons. I do not like the submission, so I am rejecting it. I mean, that is what something would be left to be said. Otherwise, it is always, the submissions are rejected. And then, again, you are asked in the last paragraph, now, therefore, hereby you are called upon to show cause as to why these amounts should not be recovered. And this is the formal show cause notice. Now, the taxpayer, what he will do? The pre-notice consultation has all the trappings of the original main show cause notice. The grounds were advanced, maybe not in detail, but they were all made known to the party. Party has participated in. He might have challenged it on merits, SSC might have challenged it on limitation or any other ground. And after doing this, when all these grounds are rejected, what will he do when the actual show cause notice comes? Because that show cause notice will be on the same basis. It will be on the same grounds. Now, and against which whatever defense submissions he would make, those submissions were already made by him in the pre-notice consultation. He is practically left with no ammunition. He is now firing the blank bullets like. And then what will happen? It is practically a preempted, the issue has been actually preempted, prejudged, and he has already lost his defense. And this is unfortunately happening day in, day out. A few of the pre-notice consultation related show cause notices and everything which I am dealing with, which I have seen, they make a really sorry reading. Absolutely sorry reading. One would be aghast at the very mechanical manner, at the arbitrary manner in which this pre-notice consultation process is undertaken at the departmental level. And frankly, friends, I have never participated in pre-notice consultation. And I never allow my clients to participate in pre-notice consultation. Not because I invite litigation. I am extremely careful, and this without any boasting I am saying, I try to avoid the litigation, getting my client into litigation, and I put my best efforts to do that. But when it is unavoidable, it is unavoidable. I would not like to burn my bridge in pre-notice consultation, and therefore, and one thing is, pre-notice consultation is not mandatory. One can simply say, acknowledge the receipt of the pre-notice consultation intimation in whatever form, either letter or DRC 01A. In fact, the fact that sub-rule 2 in DRC 01A allows you to make your representation if you are not accepting the demand, that itself is very clear. I would not even like you to why you are not accepting the demand, because that you are exposing the defense. DRC 01A, and please understand, these sub-rule which are procedural in nature have no backing of the main section. Section 73 or 74 does not speak about any such thing. This is an additional thing which is provided by the rule. It is not mandatory to participate in pre-notice consultation. And I therefore, it is basically, and that's why I may be a bit harsh, I consider it as a trap for the taxpayers, because you are exposing yourself, your defense, which in any way is going to be rejected. And finally, you are saddled with the same show cause notice, and your submissions have gone out of window. And this is unfortunate, but this is definitely not what Dr. Parthasarathi Shom had recommended or probably had in mind while making its recommendation. I am not tired of saying that TARC, which is the Tax Administration Reform Commission, if it also, and it should also stand for T for trust, A for accountability, R for responsibility, and C for cooperation. Unless and until we have trust, accountability, responsibility, and cooperation, neither the tax regime will change, the manner in which it is operated, nor such pre-notice consultation process will yield any result. So next. Coming to whether a show cause notice issued without adherence to pre-notice consultation process, that is statement in the context of GST in DRC 01A, will it be maintainable? In all these cases, the latest one being the back office IT solution rendered in the context of GST, MAD Tube investment was rendered in the context of service tax, MADS India was rendered in the context of service tax. It is now in Supreme Court for a limited purpose. The other three latest judgments are Indriya Construction, Freight System, and Hitachi Power. These are all in the context of the erstwhile regime. In all these cases, it has been held that non-adherence to pre-notice consultation process will invalidate the show cause notice. This has been held by in the context of the board instruction. What is very interesting is that the board instructions were held to be binding, though except back office where it is actually, and when back office was delivered, the period covered in back office was prior to 9th October 2019, when Sub-Rule 1A was introduced. It is prior to that period. So even in back office, the board has, the tribunal has, High Court has followed the same judgment of MADS and Tube investment. In MADS India Private Limited, Delhi High Court even referred to the Supreme Court judgment in India Cements Limited case and very clearly said that the board instructions are binding on the department. And once board said that through its two circular of December 15 and March 17, that the pre-notice consultation, if not undertaken in the specified cases, it will invalidate the demand, then these instructions are binding on the department. It is a settled law that board instructions or clarifications, if they are beneficial to the SSE, they are binding on the department. If they are prejudicial to the interest of the SSE can always challenge it. Now, what position has arisen in the context of GST? Let us take a period from 9th October 2019 till 14th October 2020. For this 1 year approximately, what has been done? The proper officer was obliged, because of the word shall, issue a statement, communicate a statement. And the word shall means mandatorily. If that is the case, the ratio of all these judgments will fully apply with much more vigor, because it is now part of the statutory provisions. However, after 15th October, we are in a quandary. We are in a quagmire, because now shall is replaced by may. He may or may not issue. And that being the case, whether the ratio of these decisions will apply or not apply, one will have to wait for it. This is a matter of debate. Another aspect, you see how this entire exercise has become futile, meaningless, and absurd. Once it is may, it means that proper officer has been given discretionary powers whether to issue DRC 01A or not. There is no mention anywhere, nor there is a board circular, neither that while exercising these discretionary powers, what the officer should take into account. If he decides not to issue DRC 01A, then what are the factors he should consider? Whether he should record the reasons in writing, even in his office file? Nothing is mentioned. There are no board instructions, no guidelines for that. Another, suppose the SSE participates in the pre-notice consultation and files his objections in part B of the DRC 01A. What is thereafter? Nobody knows. The journey ends there. The path ends there of pre-notice consultation. Whether he is to be given a hearing on the pre-notice, what is pre-notice consultation? We are calling it. The board, the government can say, revenue officer can say, this is not a pre-notice consultation. I am required to issue a statement in DRC 01A. I have issued you. Where is the law that I should call you for the hearing on that? If there is no provision for that, and if you are in any case going to go ahead with the show cause notice, then what is all this exercise all about? What is the fun in doing this exercise? No mention about hearing, and no mention about the officer's exercise of the discretionary powers and the factors we should consider about. So the whole process has now become completely absurd and totally meaningless. It would, the legislature council will do well by simply removing sub-rule 1A from the statute itself. It does not make any sense. It is a complete waste of time, money, energy of both the sides, and it is only leading to unnecessary dispute rather than the avoiding the disputes. Making such provisions in a half-hearted manner does not make sense at all. It is like basically laughing at the recommendations of the commission report also. Next, I think this ends there. Yeah. So now, so in the last one, even after all this, one finds really, yeah, Gujarat High Court judgment. I mean, I have only produced certain judgments. All the judgments on the pre-notice consultation are that if it is not adhered to, it will actually make the so-called notice invalid, and ideally, natural justice principles should be followed. One of the, significant judgments delivered by Supreme Court in Sahara India firm case, 75 ELT, if I'm not mistaken, where the Supreme Court has said that if any order or decision which is likely to affect, which prejudicially the pecuniary interest of a person, the natural justice principle should be followed. And this principle should really hold good, particularly in the taxation matters, whether the law provides for the hearing or not. It should be. But then again, these are all points of dispute. And this is exactly where my objection lies in this entire exercise. Either you make it fruitful and complete, or don't go by that. Don't make such stupid provisions, I'm sorry to say. This is nothing but the trap for the taxpayers. And still, if one feels obliged or emboldened, then and participates in the pre-notice consultation, then in that case also, one should be very guarded that what he puts on the records by way of the defense submissions. If all the elaborate arguments are made at the pre-notice consultation, assuming and with the presumption, one should have that presumption that these are going to be rejected, then one can think of what he will argue against the so-called notice. And the other thing is, and therefore, dealing with the so-called notice, one cardinal principle, this is only a couple of things I have learned in 35 years. I have not learned much in the law. One thing I have learned is, one, how to put the ball in the court of the department in the best effective manner. And secondly, every so-called notice I am fighting for losing the case. That is what actually I have learned. I always keep tribunal or high court or Supreme Court in mind and fight my case at the first level. Because I am going to lose the case at the first level. That is the presumption on which I work always. So, friends, these are on the pre-notice consultation. Now we will shift to our today's topic, appeals under GST law. Kindly shift the
Sir, is it okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Now, yeah, you can open now. First slide. Just go to the matter only, straight. Fourth. Yeah. Appeals under GST law. There are just as every tax law provides for the appeals at the successive levels, there is a hierarchical structure by which one can go from one stage to another stage before the designated appellate authorities. Appeal is the term appeal in legal context, as we all know, means an application preferred by an aggrieved party before the higher judicial forum against the decision of the lower court. It is basically appeal allows the judicial examination by the higher authority. It can be appellate first commissioner appeals in the context of GST laws or tax laws. It can be tribunal, it can be high court, it can be Supreme Court of the decision of the inferior court. It is a judicial examination of the decision undertaken decision of the any inferior court, and the purpose is to rectify any possible error in the order under the appeal. Next. Again, in state of Gujarat versus Salim by Abdul Ghaffar, the word appeal is used both in Code of Criminal Procedure and Civil Procedure, and in many other statutes. And it really explains the same thing, that it basically allows the reconsideration and an impartial judicial examination of the decision of the lower court. It is always from the inferior authority, the lower authority who has taken the decision, and then it progressively goes upwards and from one state to another state in the hierarchy of the appeal mechanism which has been set up in the court. Next. Before we come to the statutory provisions, it would be essential basically to understand the certain fundamentals concerning the appeal. The first and foremost being is right to file an appeal a natural or inherent right? In Gangabai versus Vijay Kumar, AIR 1974, the Supreme Court said there is a basic distinction between the right of suit and a right of appeal. There is an inherent right in every person to bring a suit of civil nature, and unless the suit is barred by statute, one may at one's peril bring a suit of one's choice. It is no answer to a suit, however frivolous the claim, that the law confers no such right to sue. A suit for its maintainability requires no authority of law, and it is enough that no statute bars the suit. But the position in regard to, okay, sorry. Am I now very clear?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. But the position in regard to appeal is quite the opposite. Please mark the word of the Supreme Court. But where the Supreme Court is actually explaining the distinction between the suit and appeal. But the position in regard to appeal is quite the opposite. The right of appeal inheres in no one. The right of appeal inheres in no one, and therefore an appeal for its maintainability must have the clear authority of law. That explains why the right of appeal is described as a creature of statute. In state of Maharashtra versus Mahbub Ali Boy, 85 ELT, the Supreme Court has pointed out that it is a well settled that an appeal is a creature of statute. Unless the statute provides for an appeal and specifies the order against which an appeal can be filed, no appeal can be filed or entertained as a matter of right or course. In Anand Mills Limited, again, one of the celebrity cases on this point, the same principle has been evolved, same principle has been applied by the Supreme Court. So nobody can claim the appeal as a natural or inherent right. Nobody can claim that though the statute does not provide for the appeal, filing of the appeal against the decision by which he is aggrieved, he has an inherent right to go in appeal. One has to keep it in mind. This fundamental principle. Next. Is the right to appeal a vested right? One of the most historic and celebrated decisions, scintillating significant decisions. These are two, Garikappati Viraya and Hussain Kasam Dada. In this, Supreme Court in Garikappati Viraya, they said, an issue for consideration basically had arisen in this case before the court as to whether an appeal to the Supreme Court was barred because of new monetary limits when the party had filed an appeal before the federal court and the federal court was replaced by the Supreme Court, and consequently introducing new monetary limits. There were monetary limits in work when the appeals were being filed before the federal court, but when the federal court was replaced by Supreme Court, new monetary limits were set up, and whether it would victimize the right of the party, which otherwise he had already in the statute. Construing the constitutional provisions, the bench observed that the right of appeal being a vested right at the time of commencement of the lease, LIS, lease, such right cannot be taken away unless there is an express enactment, and therefore the appeal was held to be invalid. Lease means the dispute between the parties, the matter of dispute between the two parties. When we say that there is a lease created between the department and the taxpayer, it means that a point of dispute has arisen between the two sides. And what Supreme Court said in Garikapati case is that if at the commencement of the proceedings, in the beginning itself, if a right of appeal was vested in the person, that right cannot be defeated because of the subsequent amendments, unless the subsequent amendments expressly takes away that right. The same principle was followed in Hussain Kadam Dada by the Supreme Court. And in Hussain Kadam Dada, the observations made by the Supreme Court, I would like to reiterate that right of appeal is not merely a matter of procedure, but it is a substantive right which becomes vested in a party. Such vested right cannot be taken away except by express enactment or necessary intendment. The pre-existing right is not destroyed by the amendment if the amendment is not made retrospective by express words of necessary intendment. Since the pre-existing right of appeal continues to exist, that old right law must be given the exercise and enforcement of that right, and there can be no question of the amended provisions preventing the exercise of that right. This judgment was followed by the tribunal and larger bench in a series of cases when on 6th August 2014, I beg your pardon, on 6th August 2014, when the provisions of Section 35F and section of the Central Excise Act and Section 129E relating to the Customs Act, providing for the grant of the waiver of the deposit of the money under appeal and stay, were replaced by the mandatory pre-deposit. Prior to 2014, there were no provisions for the mandatory provisions under excise service tax or customs. It was introduced only on 6th August 2014, and which has continued under GST, which we shall see later. In the context of this, when the pre-deposit provisions were introduced in the statute, this judgment had been referred to and extensively discussed in the tribunal decision. This is very important. The similar view have been taken by the in Thirumalai Chemicals case, which had arisen in the context of the FERA. It was a FERA case, Foreign Exchange Remittance Regulation Act. And again, in the cases of Sumegis Pharma versus the private limited recently in the tribunal also. Another important question is, can the right of appeal be claimed by way of implications? Can I say that I am impliedly there is a recognition of my right of appeal? In All India Reporter 1977, the Supreme Court, the Kerala High Court has said, unless a right of appeal is specifically given under statute, it cannot be claimed or exercised. If such a right is given under the statute, the exercise thereof cannot be denied. Conversely, such a right cannot be inferred by implications. In V.C. Soundararajan case, Madras High Court has said, the right of appeal being neither absolute nor an ingredient of natural justice, please mark the words, nor an ingredient of natural justice, but only a statutory right, the exercise of that right would be circumscribed by the conditions granting that right. If that right does not exist, one cannot claim that as a right. Next. The next question is, who can file it? If you see Section 107, providing for the appeal before the first appellate authority, which is Commissioner Appeal, in a loosely speaking Commissioner Appeal, in the context of GST, they are Deputy Commissioner Appeals or Joint Commissioner Appeals. In the context of the and a hierarchy is an Additional Commissioner Appeals. So in the context of that, we will call it First Appellate Authority. It says that Section 107 says, any person aggrieved by any decision or order passed under this Act, or the Goods and Services, or the State Goods and Services Tax Act, or the Union Tax Act, by any authority may appeal to such appellate authority as may be prescribed. Any person aggrieved. The same language you will find under Section 112 also, which provides for the filing of the appeal before the appellate tribunal. Now, so any person aggrieved, this is the standard language. Any person aggrieved. So only an aggrieved person can file the appeal. Who is an aggrieved person? An aggrieved person means one whose pecuniary interest is directly affected by the adjudication order and whose right of property may be established or divested thereby. And this is so the right of appeal can be exercised only by those persons who are permitted by the statute to file the appeal subject to the conditions regarding filing of the appeals. Everybody cannot join the bandwagon and say that I am also affected, I am also an interested party, and therefore I can file the appeal. It is in this context we have to understand who can file the appeal. And let us see some judicial pronouncements on this. Next. Can a recipient or customer of goods or services file the appeal? Can, as an affected party, one can say that I'm an affected party and therefore I'm entitled to file an appeal. In a Mahindra and Mahindra case, this was a very interesting case where the customer, Mahindra had supplied certain goods to the customer had borne the duty burden, and the customer has some dispute regarding some reservations about the duty charged to him. So they approached the tribunal saying that since I am bearing the burden of duty, therefore I should be entitled to file the appeal. This argument was actually not accepted by the tribunal, saying that you can't be considered to be, you may have borne the burden, but that will not give you a right to file the appeal. And accordingly, the appeal was not entertained by this third party. In Jagat Industries case, the similar principle was followed by the tribunal. In Jagat Industries case also, Rohit Palve Paper Mill also same ratio. In Ahimsa Mine Minerals versus Designated Authority, this was again a case of the concerning the FEMA. In this also, the tribunal took the same view in the context of the anti-dumping duty which had been imposed. And Ahimsa, the company's argument that it is an interested party, was not accepted by the tribunal. In the similar view have been taken in Oil Dell Trading Private Limited and Bodychem also. Next. Can a third party earn the locus standi to file an appeal as person aggrieved? This is a very interesting case of Northern Plastics and versus Hindustan Photopil. In this case, the issue was that Northern Plastic had imported certain goods on which the tax had not been charged under exemption. Hindustan Photofilms, which is a government entity, was pecuniary, is monetary interest, business was getting affected by this. And they had some reservations about the clearances, assessment of the clearances made by Northern Plastic. So they joined the appeal proceeding, they filed this appeal saying that they are the party affected, whose business is affected. This was actually at the first level of tribunal, it was not accepted by the tribunal. However, Delhi High Court accepted the contention of the company, and Delhi High Court said, yes, you are affected party. The Delhi High Court judgment was overruled by Supreme Court in this case. And what Supreme Court was observed, and this is very important, that the term person aggrieved is a wider term than the party aggrieved. Mind the words of the Supreme Court. Term person aggrieved is wider than the party aggrieved. But in the entire context of the statutory scheme, especially subsection 3 of section 129A, 129A providing for the appeal before the Commissioner Appeals, right of appeal is confined only to parties to the proceedings before the adjudicating authority. Further, it was held that a third party could earn a locus standi to file appeal as person aggrieved only if he was able to show that he had a direct legal interest in the goods involved in the adjudication, such as party contending that the said goods really belong to them and not to the purported importer. Mark the word, if a person can prove that he has a direct legal interest in the matter, in the goods involved, then maybe he can join as a party aggrieved. Neither the central government nor the rival company or industry operating in the same field as the importer, here Northern Plastic, even if it is 100% government-owned undertaking like Hindustan Photo Films, can, as a matter of right, prefer an appeal as person aggrieved. The plea by Hindustan Photo Films that if the consignment of films is cleared by Northern Plastic, it would be affected commercially, would not make it a person aggrieved in the statutory scheme. Extremely important judgment. My adverse impact on my commercial interest because of some benefit obtained by another competitor, my competitor, will not allow me to file an appeal against the assessment of my at my importer's end. Unless and until it is proved, suppose the goods are confiscated by the authorities and a person comes forward, that goods which have been confiscated in the hands of the person never belong to that person, the goods belong to me. In custom, this happens every now and then. They belong to me only, then I have a right to appeal because I have a direct legal interest in the goods. I am claiming the ownership of the goods, then I can definitely file an appeal applying the ratio of the Northern Plastics case, but otherwise no. In Usha Agarwal case also, in Bombay High Court, wherein the appellant had purchased the goods on which it was assumed earlier that no excise duty had been paid and the bank guarantee was obtained. This was a case between the petitioner and the ONGC. ONGC had obtained the bank guarantee on the ground that the duty will not be charged. However, then subsequently when the duty demand was actually raised against the ONGC, the bank guarantee was encashed. And here the petitioner had joined as a party to the appeal on the ground that they have borne the burden. And in the context of this, in these very peculiar facts of the case, Bombay High Court has allowed the petitioner to join, held the petitioner as a person aggrieved. So this certain fundamental thing, we have to keep it in mind, who can be the person aggrieved. Suppose there are large number of the members of the particular industry are affected by the particular assessment. In that case, the association cannot join the, as a appeal, in an appeal proceeding. Association cannot file the appeal on behalf of the members before the Commissioner Appeal, First Appellate Authority or the tribunal. And therefore, an ITC recipient file an appeal for tax paid by, I'll come to that. So he cannot file an appeal, association cannot. Association may contemplate the course of challenging the practice of assessment or the determination of liability or classification, whatever, before the High Court, invoking its extraordinary jurisdiction. But association cannot file an appeal saying that my all members are affected by the particular mode of determination of tax. Coming to previous one, Section 107 provides for the appeal to be filed by the appellant party. We will call them, for the simplicity's sake, we will call them taxpayers. Section 1072 allows the commissioner to file an application. You can call it an appeal. It is basically a review application. In this application, when the commissioner finds that the order passed by his subordinate is not proper, he may, for the reasons recorded to be writing, he may direct any officer to file an application before the First Appellate Authority. And then he can, and that is the application or the appeal by the department. 1121 and 1123 also contains the similar powers. On one side, it allows the taxpayer to file an appeal. On another side, against the order, even the department is allowed to file a review application at the the review process undertaken by the commissioner. Next. By the way, I just forgot to ask, are we taking 10 minutes break or 5 minutes break?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so yes. So I think I will stop here.
Sir, we will have a break at 11, sir.
11.
Okay, fine. Then that's fine. Okay. Now, what is the context, the connotation of the appellate order? Any decision or order passed under the Act or the SGST Act by an adjudicating authority. Adjudicating authority, as we saw yesterday, adjudicating authority is defined as a proper officer who is designated as such in the law. Now, so who passes the order? Now, and this is as far as the appeal before the First Appellate Authority. In case of Section 112, an order passed against any person under Section 107 So when the first appellate authority rejects the appeal, that becomes an appealable order before the tribunal, or where the revisionary authority passes an order against the person under section 108, it becomes also appealable before the tribunal. So these are the statutorily passed decisions or orders in the scheme of the thing, which are directly considered as appealable. There is no much dispute about it. Both sides can go depending upon who is aggrieved by the order. Even department can be agreed with the order. They can also challenge that order. In appellant can obviously challenge the order. Now, in that case, but the matter doesn't really end there. There are decisions and decisions, issues and issues, disputes and disputes about that what can be considered as an appealable order. There are a whole sort of, catena of judicial pronouncements on various, issues where in a particular case, whether something can be treated as an appealable order. So whether a letter demanding the tax can be considered as an appealable order. This is the, which will come to the mind, whether the letter, it can be considered as an appealable order or not. In TMT India Limited, it was held that a mere demanding the tax cannot be treated as an appealable order. In High Mile Rubber's case, there were reminder, and the appeal was held to be maintainable in that particular phase of the case. The point is, yesterday I was mentioning that if there is a demand from the proper officer, or there is a demand letter from the DGGI, or there are some observations and objections and quantification of demand by the audit also, either through the normal communication or through the draft audit report or through the final audit report, can they be challenged directly before the tribunal, before the Commissioner appeals? In my, the answer would be no. Such demand cannot be, such letter communicating the objection and they're asking the party to pay. However, what should be done at that stage? Any such demand, after examining the contents critically in the light of the law, legal provision, as well as the factual position, whether the demand is valid or not. In that case, one should really ask for put the very short, not exhaustive reply. In short, give this, put their objections into writing. If the taxpayer feels that yes, the demand is valid, then one can avoid the so cause notice. This is, there cannot be common yardstick for this. Even if there is a demand is valid, taxpayer is not under obligation in law to make the payment. He can still challenge it for what he can still demand the so cause notice. It is his prerogative whether he wants to close the case or not. So any such demand asking directly, where the entire thing is practically prejudged from the tone of the letter against the SSE, one should initially ask for the show cause notice. And after show cause notice, under section 73, obviously, one should not really talk about 74 at all. 73, show cause notice should be asked for. And even after that, if the department persists in the demand, then one can think of two things will follow. Either they persist in their demand by the reminders. Always one should insist on the reminder in writing. No oral talk. You are not even expected. It may sound very blunt and harsh, but let me tell you, with the mobile availability and the WhatsApp availability, because we live in the WhatsApp world only, no, not in any other world. The revenue officers have been also exploiting this to the hilt. So calling the taxpayer, calling the advisor of the taxpayer, and we are chalo bulawa aaya hai, Raja ne bulaya hai. So we never actually ignore such calls. You can ignore such calls. If it is official, do they really answer your calls on phone when you inquire something? First, if at all they even pick up the phone. As a taxpayer, as a tax professional, one is not obliged to undertake such type of discussion on phone. Yes, we should never leave the courtesy. We should never leave the politeness. If there is some information they are seeking or anything, that is fine. Then also one should be polite enough to ask for it in black and white. But such time, अभी आपने क्या decision लिया है, क्या पैसे भरते हो कि नहीं, कि फिर हम आगे action ले. The standard language which is being used, it should be resisted. It should not be allowed. and one should not really entertain. तो बोले कि सर जो भी है आप लीगली आप करना है आप कर लीजिए, हमने मैटर देख लिया है, we are not agreeing to that. And even after that, if the demand persists in the writing, one can, just to be on a safer side, file an appeal, or otherwise what will, or the next thing which will arise is, they may go ahead with the attachment or some other action, then High Court can come into the picture.